Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm continuing with the theme of clickbait video titles. I can get used to that, seems like good fun. But there is a more serious topic that I want to talk about here. So I'm not going to be doing a presentation, I'm just going to be talking out loud my thought on quite a specific issue. And that is, how do we get past Brexit in a way? And the reason why I posed that question is because I was listening to a debate between two brothers who voted on either side of the Brexit debate. And it was a nice debate, it was a nice amicable conversation between the two brothers who had their own views but weren't going to let it ruin their relationship, which I thought was really good. But having said that, what you found was that basically they remained entrenched. They hadn't really changed. And I think for me that very much symbolises the whole Brexit debate and the way the country is right now. Those who voted for or against Brexit still remain extremely entrenched in their views. Worse than that, 6 years on, I think both sides feel a deepening level of disgust at each other for continuing this debate, which continues to be toxic, it continues to be extremely divisive. And I think that is very concerning, and I think there needs to be a fix to that particular problem. And that is not going to be easy with two sides that really don't respect each other anymore in many ways, or feel extremely defensive. So let me perhaps try and find a balanced way through this debate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about negotiation context here because this is extremely relevant. Before I do that, let's dive a little bit back into the motivations for Brexit. Now, those who voted for Brexit, and as I've said before on this channel, take away the racism, take away the jingoism and all the other nonsense and noise that surrounded Brexit. At a core, we can obviously debate how significant a core that is in terms of numbers, but at its core, many people voted for Brexit for an intangible reason, not a tangible. They didn't vote for improved trade or to erect trade barriers or even to limit immigration numbers, supposedly. They voted for the intangible, and that intangible was improved democratic accountability. Because this is one of the problems that is the European Union faces, is that it doesn't feel directly democratically accountable to the citizens in which its lives they can influence by allocation of money and policies and so on. So those who, they might struggle to be able to articulate it, but those who voted for Brexit were essentially voting for improved democracy. And that's not a bad thing, that's a reasonable thing. Of course, those who voted for Remain will make the very clear point that that is an extremely harmful way of improving your democracy, and you don't actually need to leave the EU to do it. But let's park that debate for now. The part I want to get into, and this is the reason why this is relevant, is because those two brothers were kind of agreeing that they need to move on and we need to make Brexit work and so on. And I slightly disagree with that because I think they hadn't addressed the fundamental core issue. Now, I see this a lot in negotiations. People get entrenched in their positions and they end up talking at each other, not to each other. Worse still, they end up not fully understanding or listening to each other. And what that means is they don't actually address the core fundamental blocker that is holding up that negotiation. What is the specific thing that is preventing the negotiation from moving forward? This is because they're projecting their own views, their own biases onto the negotiation and not quite understanding the full context or the full concerns of the other side. And that is very much what I think is now happening. It always has happened, but it is now significantly happening in the Brexit debate. Because the problem is, in negotiation, you like to talk about tangibles. You want to focus on the money side of things. You want to focus on the standards, the things that are actually written down. That is quite logical, sensible, reasonably easy to negotiate over. People can go through that. But not everyone thinks on a sort of tangible, logical type of way. Sometimes people think in a more emotive type of way, and emotive styles of negotiations are very bad negotiations, as a rule. But the reality is that if the other side are approaching an issue from an emotive mindset, then you can't just dismiss that or be rude or patronizing about it. You actually have to address it. You have to understand what their emotional concerns are, and you have to figure out how to address that in order to allow the negotiation to progress forward. Having said all that, let's turn back to democracy and Brexit. Those who voted for Brexit believed they were voting for democracy. Those who voted to remain, by and large, did not believe that. They saw that as a huge lie. And in the 6 years since that referendum result, the politicians and the media have done absolutely nothing whatsoever to ease those concerns. Quite the reverse, in fact. So if you voted to remain, you might be a Remainer that didn't particularly think the EU was great, but you thought the alternative was far worse, and you thought that giving more power to the likes of Boris Johnson, for example, is a recipe for disaster. And this is kind of what has happened. Is the likes of Boris Johnson has completely trampled over British democracy. And that's not particularly subjective view. It's very much clearly evident in the actions and what he has done and the damage that he has caused. And those who voted for Brexit may try and pretend to deny that, but that is it's patently obvious to everybody. And even those who do vote for Brexit usually acknowledge that. But the problem is that there's still this core concern that needs to address. It is not good enough for those who voted for Brexit to tell those who didn't to move on. That is just not good enough. It is also not good enough for those who voted for Remain to basically despise those who voted for Brexit for being stupid. Let's be honest, it's easy to do because many of the debates there on that side are focusing on all the damage that Brexit has done, and by any objective measure that anyone wishes to use, the damage is clear. It's really there in data. But the problem is that's the tangible. And those who voted for Brexit didn't vote for that tangible. They voted for the intangible. They voted for democracy. So switching back to that theme, those who did not believe in Brexit believed that it would harm our democracy. So here we are, 6 years on, and that belief, far from being lessened, is probably stronger than ever, probably worse than ever. So here's where the debate kind of needs to go next. If those who voted for Brexit, you cannot tell somebody to accept a decline in democracy. I mean, after all, that's what they voted for. They voted for an increase in democracy. They voted for more accountability. If the other side does not believe that is happening, you cannot expect them to put up and shut up and just allow the country to become less democratic. Now, they may disagree that that is what is happening, but you cannot dismiss that that is the concern of the other side. And here's one of the fundamental truths about democracy. Democracy works when people don't accept the status quo. The whole point of a democracy is to give a group of people a viable and non-violent way in which they can disagree with the state, they can disagree with the general population at large, and they can campaign for change. Democracy works because of that. So if you have a government that is absolutely determined to suppress that, and I'm no union person, but to have a government that is trying to suppress the ability of the union to call strikes as a deliberate attempt to reduce their democratic rights, in addition to suppressing the right of people to protest, then you're really onto a very slippery path of anti-democracy. That is the current path the UK government is on. It is stripping away, bit by bit, more rights from UK citizens, whether that's on human rights, immigration rights such as they are, working rights, protest rights, union rights, anything you care to name. They seem to be reducing, not improving. So those who voted for Brexit doesn't mean you have to say you're wrong to vote for Brexit. That's not what I'm saying. But they absolutely do have to acknowledge that the people in charge possibly aren't delivering Brexit. Because if they cannot acknowledge that, then it's going to be very hard for those on the other side of the debate to have any respect for them. And that is only going to get worse if those who supported Brexit just said, oh, we won, move on. It's like, no. Sorry, no. Why should I? Why should I allow individuals such as yourself to ruin the UK and make it a less democratic place? And now that's not a very strong statement. It's quite toxic. It's not going to further the debate. But I would encourage anyone in that mindset to really think about it. If the tables were turned and you believed that the country was genuinely becoming less democratic and a worse place, would you stand for it? Would you stay quiet? And if the answer is no, then why would you expect those who voted for Remain to shut up? It may be 6 years on, and yes, we're all bored to death of talking about Brexit. But if they feel strongly that the UK has become less democratic, then they shouldn't be shutting up. It is their duty to talk up, to campaign against it, to find solutions to resolve the problem. And this is what needs to happen next. Both sides of the debate need to stop, well, not stop really, but need to stop talking at cross purposes. And at the moment, we've got the Remain side saying, look at all these data and figures that show Brexit is not a disaster. And the Brexit side said, oh, that doesn't matter, it's not important. That's not what we voted for. That's currently where the debate is at, and it's not really getting anywhere. So what they do need to do is have a conversation about democracy, the intangible, and think, what is it that the country should want going forward? Should it be democratic reform? Should it be electoral reform? Should it be an elected second chamber? Should we be prosecuting politicians for corruption? A whole host of things. None of that has been debated at the moment, and that's deliberate. That is because the politicians in the media do not want people debating that. They want people going against each other because that serves their interest. They don't want Brexiteers and Remainers uniting in their condemnation of how the political class have treated them and saying, right, that is it, we're changing it, we're limiting your power, and we are going to demand democratic changes to make the country a better place. That is the debate that needs to happen next in a post-Brexit world, and that is the only way that I can see that both sides of the argument can move on and can get past this very toxic and divisive period in British politics. And I really hope that more people are able to do that. Right now I don't see much of that happening in the political and news arena. So as the context of that, it needs to happen more at grassroots level. So this is what I would encourage people, whether you voted for Brexit or for Remain, to try to listen to each other, try to get to those core concerns, and then try to reach an area that you try to figure out what it is you can agree on. And by and large, I think many people will probably find a surprising level of agreement when it comes to talking about the issue of fixing Westminster politics and the need to do so. And if that becomes the outcome of Brexit, then Brexit will start to become less of a disaster and more positive outcomes can result. And we can see that in the shift in policy from the Labour side. But we're not at all seeing that from the Conservative side. And so that is where perhaps the future electoral battleground will be. Is that what do you want British democracy to look like in a sort of post-Brexit world? So I hope you found these musings helpful. This is a difficult debate to have in many ways. I could rabbit on for a very long time. But I can draw parallels with my negotiation experience of having been stuck in these sorts of discussions. And so the only advice I can give you for both sides is to find areas of commonality. And you do that by understanding core concerns, not by dismissing them, not by belittling people. Now, of course, if you are a Remainer and the Brexiteer you're debating with is a racist and only talks about immigration as their reason to vote for Brexit, let's be honest, this is going to be a very short conversation. There isn't much you can talk about. But truthfully, they are not in the majority. And I have had plenty of conversations with people who voted for Brexit who were very willing to admit that Brexit has not gone well, it has not delivered what they wanted it to deliver, and that the UK government has made an absolute mess of it. That doesn't mean they had to renounce Brexit or say that they didn't want it to happen, but it did mean that they wanted it to be delivered better. And on that, it was a much easier ground to find agreement and to have a better debate and a more harmonious plan, as you like, of moving forward. So that is what I would encourage everybody to do, where I would encourage everyone to go if we are ever to get away from this divisive, toxic debate. So I hope you found this helpful. Please do like and subscribe and do comment in the box below.